And now, ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America Audio with your host, Tim Binnall.
Hello out there, my friends. This is Tim Binnall of BinnallofAmerica.com with another edition of Binnall of America Audio, Season 2. It is March 17th, 2007. Happy St. Patrick's Day, folks. Our guest this week is Mac Tonnies, Part 2 of 2, and we're going to be discussing two big topics. First, we're going to be talking about the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, something that Mac Tonnies has been working on for the better part of a year or so and really picked up a buzz over the course of the last 6 months. Everybody seemed to be talking about the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, and you really get the feeling that a lot more people are going to be talking about it in the months and years to come as this theory starts to gain ground. We're going to talk to the man who really got the whole ball rolling on the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, Mac Tonnies. It's his baby. We're going to go in-depth on the CTH, what it is, what it isn't, and a ton of details. In the second half of this installment, we're going to talk about ufology, some of the big picture questions we like to discuss here on the show. Young people in ufology, ufology in the internet, disclosure, other hot button topics. Plus, of course, we're going to talk about tons and tons more stuff. It is jam-packed. I can't even recap it really here in the preview. So let's just move right into the bio. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Mac Tonnies, let me tell you a little bit about him. Mac Tonnies is an author/essayist whose futuristic fiction and speculative essays have appeared in many print and online publications. He's the author of Illuminated Black, a collection of science fiction short stories, and After the Martian Apocalypse. Mac maintains Posthuman Blues, a widely read blog devoted to emerging technologies and paranormal phenomena, and is a member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research. He lives in Kansas City, Missouri, where he writes, reads, and surfs the net. He is currently at work on a new book on the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis. His blog is posthumanblues.blogspot.com, and his formal website is mactonnies.com, mactonnies.com. Without any further ado, let's rock and roll. This interview was recorded on January 20th, 2007. Mac Tonnies, Part 2 of 2. On Binnall of America Audio, Season 2. Let's move on now to your present work, and it's really created quite a buzz in the UFO field in the last 6 months to a year or so, and that's this cryptoterrestrial hypothesis. So for starters, why don't you bring everybody up to speed so far on what the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis is, and we'll build from there.
Yeah, the cryptoterrestrial idea is basically a synthesis of other ideas that have been around for a while, but never quite in this form. I'm kind of drawing on research by Jaques Valee, John Keel, even Graham Hancock to some degree, thinkers like that, unorthodox ideas that we're sharing the planet with a non-human intelligence. And specifically that this intelligence is responsible in large part for the UFO phenomenon as we know it. And it's a very appealing theory on some levels, but on other levels, it's quite off-putting because it recalls some very lame ideas, like Richard Shaver's idea of the hollow Earth populated by degenerate robots and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it has a certain kook factor to it that some people sense immediately and use to denigrate it, and which is fine because there's always area for disagreement. But I've grown increasingly uncomfortable with the extraterrestrial hypothesis as the final word for what UFOs must be, if they're not some sort of psychological manifestation or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that this is a much wider inquiry, and if you look at the present state of ufology, you find that it's very addicted to the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's almost like, well, it's either a natural phenomenon or it's aliens, and I think that's far too simplistic. I still think that the questions outweigh the possible explanations. So I am simply attempting to come up with a thought experiment, and posing the question to researchers: why can't this work? Why what's unscientific about this?
Yeah.
You know, this is something that's conceivably testable given sufficient resources. And I'm not proposing, incidentally, that these non-humans that share the planet with us are from another dimension, and that's one of the pretty integral ideas behind Valee's idea of the multiverse, for example.
Yeah.
I'm simply stating that these are flesh and blood creatures. You know, they might have some advantageous abilities that might be called psychic, for lack of a better term. But I don't think we're dealing with something quote unquote paranormal so much as anthropological.
Yeah. That's what that's particularly fascinating. And I wanted to ask you, these cryptoterrestrials within this hypothesis, are they living like literally amongst us, or would they be found in sort of like an isolated pocket?
I think they stick to isolated areas. I think that they have. Probably bases underwater. We have lots of reports of UFOs sighted near mountainous regions that are pretty much inaccessible to normal people without recourse to technology, of course. But and also near bodies of water, emerging and descending into bodies of water.
Yeah.
Even right in our backyard, so to speak. So yeah, that's an option. And another option is that at least some of these beings are sufficiently human-like that they can pass among us pretty much undetected. I don't think that they probably show themselves off too much, but I think that they nevertheless are among us and possibly taking us in, and you could kind of liken them to secret agents, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, seeing where we stand, because if they're sharing the planet with us, then they probably have at least some interest in how we're faring as a species, because we could be kind of a canary for them. You know, if we go, they go. That would explain why so many UFOs are seen hovering over military installations and nuclear power plants.
Mm-hmm.
They might have a stake in all this. And that offers an explanation that the ETH really doesn't. You can always argue, well, visiting aliens from some other star they're going to be interested in our ability to end life on this planet because we're interesting research specimens and they don't want to see their experiment perish. And that's, there's an argument to be made there, but I don't think that's the final argument.
And then you sort of poo-poo and say that this isn't a hollow earth. You don't have any. You don't tie this into hollow earth, right?
No, I don't. Okay. I don't. The earth isn't hollow. No, you don't need a hollow earth to accommodate these hypothetical beings. They could live. I'm convinced that they could live on the earth, more or less as we know it. Yeah,
sort of a la Bigfoot.
Oh yeah, Bigfoot is indeed a primate. Here we've got this, and you've got some like Jane Goodall, for example. She advocates the scientific study of Bigfoot. Yeah. She doesn't rule out the existence of a large primate living in our backyard. And if you can allow for the existence of something big and smelly, as Bigfoot is described as being,
yeah.
Right here, living on the fringes of human existence, and right at the edge of our perception, then who's to say that someone more intelligent could? In fact, I would argue that it's more likely that someone with higher than human average intelligence could pull off a secrecy act like this, than some sort of big shambling Neanderthal-like primate.
Hopefully Bigfoot's not listening.
Hopefully Bigfoot's not listening. I could be totally wrong on Bigfoot. Maybe Bigfoot is much smarter than he's depicted as being in the media. Could be.
I'm going to throw out some just sort of peripheral UFO-related stuff here, and you can kind of let me know how this fits into the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis. I'm trying to wrap my head around it, really, because it's very interesting, and it's a new way of looking at the whole phenomenon, really. So let me start with just abductions, because you sort of touch on that a little bit in some of your writings. Where do you see the abduction phenomenon fitting into the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis?
Well, you read Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs, and I'm aware of the limitations of hypnosis and the dangers of it. Nevertheless, even if it weren't for those guys, if you look at the folkloric evidence going back a long, long, long time, there is a preoccupation with human reproduction, with small, diminutive, exceedingly smart, clever humanoids in our midst.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much undeniable. And if these beings are real, then they would seem to have some sort of preoccupation with our ability to reproduce, and even to the point of creating hybrid offspring with us. And if that is so, then wow, maybe they are trying to preserve their genetic legacy. Maybe they are trying to improve themselves or infuse their genetic stock with new material so they can keep going. We seem to be numerically superior to these hypothetical beings.
Yeah.
In which case, they might be suffering from, they might be suffering from some genetic maladies that they cannot cure by themselves, or simply it's simply more efficient for them to address by infusing themselves with our genes. And that would account for at least some accounts of alien abduction that have this very reproductive overtone to them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm going there in a very, very, very small nutshell.
Now, does the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, does it leave the door open for the ETH? Or?
Yeah, I some people, again, it's this very binary outlook, but I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive, and I've tried to make that clear, and some people get it and some don't. No, we could be being visited by aliens and still have these beings on Earth. This is a thought experiment, and I justify it because it's testable, just like the face on Mars is testable. And how we test it is a little more indirect and a little bit more of a slippery proposition than Martian artifacts. I'll give you that, but nevertheless, I think it's a valid hypothesis, and that's why I don't use the word hypothesis because it sounds lofty and scientific. I use it because hopefully it'll remind people that I'm not saying that this is the way it is. It is just that. It is a possibility, and hopefully a scientifically testable possibility. And it's going to be hard to test because if I'm right, then these people don't want to be discovered.
Yeah, well, how do you suggest going about testing for the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis?
There are various ways. Part of it is looking in the fossil record, or looking at our own DNA, or taking a much more robust interest in forensic aspects of alien abductions, and looking for genetic material.
Yeah.
Because again, with this, I don't think that we're dealing with beings that are godlike in the sense that extrasolar aliens are purported to be godlike and incapable of error. In fact, if we were dealing with aliens in the usual sense of the word, I think that they would be able to do pretty much whatever they wanted to do, and we wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
We wouldn't even recognize the fact that they were here. Instead, we're seeing something that seems remarkably humanoid and remarkably amenable to human psychology. The fact that these things are humanoid and we can converse with them, albeit telepathically sometimes, and recognize such things as facial expressions, and even associate with their technology and seem to know where they're coming from on a interpersonal level, is exceedingly unlikely in the event of extrasolar visitation. It seems to me that we're dealing with a kind of human, an unrecognized aspect of the human species. In this case, an offshoot. And, I don't know where they originated specifically, but they seem to be extremely stealthy and extremely clever and extremely desperate in a very interesting way.
Now, you say some of a lot of this is based on folklore-ish type of stuff and that kind of thing. And do you ascribe any sort of look to what you think these cryptoterrestrials might be like? Would they be what people assume are the Greys, or would they be something along like a fairy leprechaun type of creature?
I actually have a report from a guy in Oregon who's met some of these beings, and he describes them as being diminutive and very small people. That sometimes they almost hobo-like people, but they're very small, and they claim to predate known Native American civilizations and have their own language and stuff like that.
Wow!
But they don't look like the Greys. They're not little spindly aliens with big giant eyes. On the other hand, you've got some reports of the Greys and certain traits, certain salient aspects of descriptions of the Greys that go back a long time in folklore. Long arms and fingers and big eyes and things like that. And anomalies with complexion and stuff like that isn't exactly new. It didn't surface in the mid '80s with communion, as some people are comfortable assuming. And I'm drawn to the possibility that these are indeed exaggerated aspects, possibly of an actual species. A really interesting book that makes sense in light of the cryptoterrestrial idea is John Keel's Mothman Prophecies. He describes some very strange people that have weird physical traits. These long fingers, these strange complexions, and very strange mannerisms.
Yeah.
And he could be describing just very eccentric, weirdo people.
Yeah.
But again, the parallels with descriptions of assumed aliens force me to wonder if maybe we're dealing with an intelligence that utilizes the human form to pass among us, if only for limited periods of time.
Yeah. And then how do you sort of fit the classic UFO scenario into the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, being, the lights in the sky, UFO sightings type of thing?
Right.
Would you say the UFOs are, possibly their vehicles, or and
possibly
also
they could be, although I think possibly a much more likely explanation in at least some episodes is that UFOs are misdirection. If we're dealing with a species that desires secrecy, what better way to throw us off the scent than to masquerade as extrasolar aliens?
Mm-hmm.
You've got the Condon effect, where you even mentioned the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation in context of the UFO phenomenon, and people scoff.
Yeah.
And if I were a non-human living here on this planet and wanted to deny my own existence, I'd utilize that. I take advantage of that. I take advantage of the fact that people unreasonably deny the existence of extrasolar aliens, and use UFOs as a subterfuge. You look at UFOs like the Washington Nationals, Rendlesham, the Zamora case. I can't even begin to name them all, and they all have this very staged theatric flavor, where they look like these are objects that are in the sky for us to see.
Yeah. Which
is not exactly what you'd expect of a alien task force here on Earth to observe us.
Mm-hmm.
It's anything but clinical. They're flying around the skies, taunting our aircraft, being seen by lots of people. To top it off, they're covered with flashing lights and doing all these fascinating acrobatics and taunting us. And it could be we're dealing with something as quote unquote simple as some sort of holographic technology, or they could be actual craft. We could be dealing with a civilization that has mastered anti-gravity and is using props to just tantalize us to the point of paralysis, where we're reduced to just hashing over the same old theoretical possibilities without considering the possibility that the answer is right under our noses the whole time.
Mm-hmm. You're not big on the conspiracy aspect of the Mars stuff, but where do you fall into the conspiracy aspect of the UFO phenomenon and government cover-up of UFO information?
That's a good question because I'm really not sure. I'm a little more open to the possibility of a UFO cover-up. If you have certain UFO incidents that certainly have the flavor of the government knowing more than it does.
Yeah.
And if we're dealing with indigenous humanoids as opposed to aliens from another planet, then it increases the likelihood that the government knows that that's what we're dealing with. You have events like the Roswell crash. Some of the materials are described in a way that superficially is balloon-like.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about the Roswell crash is that none of the explanations work. The Project Mogul explanation fails. The flying saucer from another planet doesn't fare much better, although it might be just as good. But perhaps it was some sort of surveillance device built by a civilization right here on Earth. That doesn't mean that it wasn't a balloon of some kind, but maybe it wasn't our balloon. Maybe it was someone else's device. And maybe the rash of sightings after World War II were an attempt to assess the situation. What's going on? Are these people capable of blowing themselves up? What's the ecological assessment? Should we be afraid? That sort of thing. So if we stumbled across the wreckage of an attempt to monitor one of our military bases or something like that, I think in a laboratory setting it would be a lot easier to figure out that these beings originated from right here on Earth, rather than some other star system. And I think some people would start to have some hunches along those lines, and might even start seeking out possible bases. And if that's the case, then it's conceivable that some faction, some arbitrary faction within the government hierarchy has established some sort of diplomatic relationship with these beings, because they certainly seem capable in some respects, and very frighteningly so. Nevertheless, I don't think that they are necessarily even our technological superiors, except in certain aspects. We have some things that they don't appear to have. We have a global infrastructure. We have nuclear weapons. We have all kinds of very elaborate and overt, toys in our possession that we don't see any blatant evidence of this kind of thing with the alleged cryptoterrestrials, which leads me to believe that they are relying on some other kind of technology that eludes us. But it's not impossible that someone somewhere has put a few pieces of the puzzle together, and at least has a suspicion that we're dealing with beings native to this planet instead of hailing from the far depths of space. So that's not an impossible scenario. Why haven't they destroyed us? Because I think they need us.
But let's go from what you just said there and say, why do you think they need us for the genetic element?
Yeah, that's kind of back to the genetic element again. I think that they're trying to perhaps steer our psychosocial evolution, and that's an idea that kind of goes back to Jaques Valee's idea of the multiverse, where we're dealing with some sort of trickster. And we could indeed be dealing with a trickster, but not necessarily from a parallel universe or some other aspect of space-time, like John Keel gets into with his idea of the electromagnetic superspectrum, which is a very appealing idea in that it kind of lends scientific terminology to old occult notions. Mm-hmm. But with the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, we're dealing with an intelligence that has a stake in our ability to keep the planet livable, because it realizes and is humble enough to acknowledge that we have a not inconsiderable say in what goes on here, and is willing to acknowledge that our downfall may very well be their downfall. So rather than make open contact with us, which is something that I don't think it has any intention of doing, because it would entail its collapse, it prefers to remain in the background and kind of waging a form of psychotronic warfare on us, kind of deluging us with memes. And one of those memes, of course, is that we must be dealing with extraterrestrial aliens and not a native intelligence.
Have you looked at the evolution of the UFO phenomenon since it really sort of exploded in the 40s onward to now, and try to fit that into the CT cryptoterrestrial point of view, and looked at maybe from their point of view what was going on there?
I think maybe we got out of control when after World War II. That's when we started seeing Moore's law go into effect, and we're now kind of racing towards what some people have termed a singularity, and a technological singularity, and that could prove disastrous for a visiting not a visiting intelligence, but an indigenous intelligence. If the CTs are real and among us, then they would have had thousands of years in which to pretty much control us at their whim. We're lots of isolated tribes and city-states, and they could have ruled the planet. And perhaps their time is up, and they're fearing a sort of end game. And maybe some of the more recent sightings that seem credible are an attempt to kind of get us ready for an eventual contact, if only as a contingency.
Yeah.
That's an idea that kind of has a certain paranoid charm. I don't know if it's a fact or not. On the other hand, maybe this is the plan all along. Maybe they wanted us to become a technological equal with them. Maybe they've been kind of subliminally coaxing us. Maybe they're lonely. Maybe they need company. You know, maybe they're tired of this millennia old, taking our DNA and using us as glorified livestock. Maybe they'd like to have an equal and like to enter into some sort of symbiotic relationship with us instead of remaining on the margins. And if you read lots of reports of alien abductions, I get the feeling that this is indeed an element that's being overlooked, because some of the people writing about their experiences with ostensible UFOnauts are writing from the perspective of people who think they're dealing or have dealt with literal extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
And the cryptoterrestrial idea doesn't seem to have entered their mind. Nevertheless, we find lots of references to underground bases and things of that nature. And that kind of makes me suspicious that there's something to this, despite the prevailing wisdom that we're dealing with aliens.
That there's something to what? To the
something to the cryptoterrestrial idea. The fact that we're getting feedback that seems to confirm it, even from people who are gung ho ETH.
Yeah, so you're almost saying like instead of they're extraterrestrials and they came here and set up base, that they've been here all along instead.
Yes, yeah, I think that they've evolved on this planet. Yeah.
One aspect that kind of came up here as I'm listening to you sort of extrapolate on the CTH. Especially in light of how you think that maybe they're steering the human culture, is that it does sort of tread dangerously close to the sinister reptilian theory, and with the exception of that they don't seem very sinister. But
I think they're more sympathetic than sinister.
Okay, sort of. So you're not part of the big reptilian movement, then?
No, not at all. The reptilians seem to be a cultural conceit that kind of arose after the television series V became popular. Yeah. And they kind of entered into the little symbolic lexicon, of ufology, of all the beings, the taxonomy of the otherworldly, and maybe there are beings with reptilian aspects out there. I don't know, but the cryptoterrestrials, I think, are more human-like. Yeah. I think that a lot of them could walk down the street.
Have you thought about crop circles at all, and if they work into the CT theory and what they might be all about?
I haven't. I am inclined to think crop circles are outright hoaxes or possibly microwave experiments using stealth blimps or satellites. I think there's actually some evidence that some crop circles, although probably the very minute percentage, are actually unexplained in the sense that they're not accomplished with boards and rope. But no, I don't think there's a link with the UFO intelligence, whatever that intelligence is. Although there has been, I think some people would like us to think that there is, and even going so far as to perhaps stage a UFO sighting here and there. But that's not out of the realm. That's not out of what the military could do, for example, for relatively trivial reasons. One of the things I noticed on your blog when you're talking about the crypto-terrestrial theory is you do sort of mention this whole DMT research and the elves, and I think you call them they're called tykes or something like that. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that, because I have found that to be pretty fascinating stuff, and I haven't heard much about it. Yeah, there are huge parallels between people who have experienced episodes with DMT and other drugs and other altered states, not just chemically derived, and the archetypal alien abduction experience. And I should include near-death experiences with that as well. Yeah. So one of my little cautious propositions is that if we're dealing with cryptoterrestrials, then they have somehow had a kind of instead of an industrial revolution as we have had, they've had kind of a breakthrough in the mechanics of consciousness. Yeah. And possess some abilities that are pretty remarkable from our perspective. Nevertheless, I think that we share share some of those with them. And we shouldn't automatically preclude some sort of telepathy or some sort of well, maybe it's like an internet. We get on a website or a chat room or a blog and interact with other people. Maybe, but that requires lots of substantial physical hardware, in the world that we all experience, the physical world. But maybe these cryptoterrestrials have one of the reasons we don't see, blatant evidence of their artifacts is because they've exploited this hitherto underdeveloped science of the mind, and are able to converse through some sort of form of quantum entanglement.
Yeah.
And maybe DMT is a tool with which we might be able to communicate with them on a meaningful basis. And also, you have geomagnetic anomalies that seem to trigger a so-called hallucinatory tripwire in the brain. And again, this might have some sort of relevance to the CT question as well.
Yeah. Like you're saying that the cryptoterrestrials, they're existing here with us, so that precludes the other realms of where the ETs might be coming from, or where the beings might be coming from, which are like obviously ET, interdimensional, and time traveler. You don't do you work in those at all? The interdimensional aspect you kind of touched on there.
Well, it kind of comes down to the is the ETH mutually exclusive with the CTH, and it's not. We could be dealing with all kinds of things, but the overall flavor of the encounter experience leads me to believe that we don't necessarily need those. It's kind of an Occam's razor type thing. We don't necessarily need recourse to other dimensions or outer space to account for the contacts of these very, very strangely mannered human-like beings that we've been coming into contact with since prehistory, it seems to me. Another legend that fascinates me is the Sumerian myth of the being that comes out of the water and teaches us how to be civilized, teaches us the art of building a city and all the establishments attendant to that. And that's interesting, because if this is a cryptoterrestrial intelligence, not only does it provide a link with the underwater origin that you find a lot with UFOs emerging from lakes and oceans, but it also entails that perhaps they have some sort of, not altruistic, but some sort of participatory stake in what we do with ourselves. And if they care enough to teach us the art of civilization, then why do they care? What do they get out of this? I find it hard to believe that they are altruists, and that comes back to the Space Brothers of the 1950s. You had all these people emerging from flying saucers, telling us all these wonderful things that we wanted to hear, and you can readily explain that, by recourse to mythology and the desire to believe. But at the same time, maybe some of these experiences were real, but staged. Maybe they were productions enacted by this intelligence that we might be sharing the planet with, to kind of get our collective attention. We weren't shown the literal truth, because that's the last thing that they'd want to show us. So they showed us sexy women in space outfits landing in these, flying saucers, because that's what we were expecting. We'd reached this point in history where we expected the skies to be filled with alien spacecraft, because that seemed like the logical next thing, because that's what we were going to do. Yeah. And the same thing with lots of, and this goes back to Valee's paper, The Absurd Humanoids, where he actually did a statistical study of all the sightings of little humanoids, on roadsides and stuff, taking soil samples. How sensible is this if we're dealing with aliens from another star system? It's much more likely that this is being enacted for our benefit, to make us think we're being visited by beings from another star system. Yeah.
That's fascinating. This is a really fascinating road to go down.
Yeah, it goes in circles. you reach these ellipses, and you try to extricate yourself from these, and it's a labyrinth. You just keep going. So it's necessarily speculative. I realize that this is weird stuff.
Yeah, but, the ETH hypothesis has been taken as far as it really can.
Well, and ETH is weird stuff, too.
Oh, obviously, yeah.
It basically asks us to ignore everything that we've learned about the progress of technology here on Earth. It takes a very 1930s approach to technological development, and assumes that aliens are going to be flesh and blood creatures visiting us in metal spaceships, much like the Apollo astronauts on the moon.
Yeah.
Did in the 1960s, and I find that absurd. I think if we're visited by beings from another star system, it's going to be, well, like I said earlier, we probably wouldn't even know they were here unless they explicitly wanted us to know. But if they were open about their existence, we'd find that they would be almost appallingly alien. We might not even be able to comprehend them in many respects, and their technologies would be, to quote Arthur C. Clarke, indistinguishable from magic. And that's not what we're seeing, or seem to be seeing, with the cryptoterrestrial angle.
Yeah.
We seem to be seeing a human intelligence, an intelligence possessed of very recognizably human attributes.
And you think, yeah, especially noteworthy would be like the fallibility of these other beings, in that they crash.
Yeah, right, exactly. They don't seem all that godlike. They seem pretty vulnerable in some respects. I think that's kind of their secret. I don't think they want us to know how fragile they are. If you read lots of abduction narratives, you find people being spirited away in a very, people describe it almost like being in the grips of a paramilitary unit.
Yeah.
In other words, these people have time constraints. These people are their fingers are on the trigger. They're nervous about being discovered. They're not omniscient.
Yeah, it does sound very leprechaun-esque, too.
Right. Yeah, and it goes back, and I think that there's a definite parallel there. I think people are addressing the same core enigma using the conceits at their disposal.
And one of the sort of big news stories that came out that definitely lends credence to the crypto hypothesis is this race of hobbits that they found.
Yes, yeah.
I'm sure that added a lot of fuel to the crypto fire as it started growing.
Well, yeah, I found it. Well, here's a proof of concept. We have small humanoids, and they're not, degenerate people. It's an actual offshoot of the human species. They're actually humans, and it turns out that these people interacted with humans as we know them. So here we have, a diminutive offshoot race on an island doing their own thing, but yet barely recognized. We're just now learning that they existed, and take it the other way. Let's say that these beings were more advanced, and it's kind of more like the Bigfoot question. Would Bigfoot secrecy be more well served if Bigfoot was, assuming Bigfoot exists, of course, if it was a dumb, primate, or if it was a technologically advanced being that elected to exist on the fringes. So yeah, the hobbits are kind of a proof of concept. Whether a sophisticated version of the hobbits could exist in our world of ubiquitous surveillance and aircraft and radar and everything else, all these technologies that have the potential to just uncover their existence. That's another question that I think remains unresolved, but I think it's possible. And I think that's maybe one reason why the underwater aspect to the UFO phenomenon is worth considering. It tends to go ignored. And Ivan Sanderson is a good guy to read, because here's a zoologist coming at the UFO enigma with no real preconceptions. He comes at it almost with an endearing naivete, and I like that, because he's pretty much free of the prevailing dogma. And he's proposing creatures. He's proposing terrestrial intelligences and things like that too, but in a different way.
Was there any sort of moment when this cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, like the light bulb, went off for you, or has it just sort of been percolating over the course of the last few years or whatever? And how long have you sort of been working on it, if you will?
Well, I think it probably started last February in some small way. Mm-hmm. It's always been at kind of the periphery of my consciousness. Ever since I started reading Willie Strieber, and If it was just Willie Strieber, then I could dismiss it. Well, this is one guy's interpretation. This is one guy's take on something that he's quite possibly not able to understand.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't blame him. But it's not just him; it's all kinds of different people describing a phenomenon that seems, on the surface, tantalizingly like extraterrestrial visitation. But when you look just a little bit deeper, you start realizing that the texture of these narratives is rather porous, but not in a way that leads me to believe that these people are lying or delusional, but in a way that leads me to think that they're being shown things. And one case that's very explicit in this respect is Betty, Andreas, and Luca's abductions, where she's obviously being shown simulated events to elicit a psychological reaction, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
She's seeing all these mythological things, even she doesn't think it's real. She knows, she appears to know on some level that she's seen staged events that the little aliens are showing her for her benefit. And if you grant that a species has this kind of ability to conjure up images like this, who's to say they're not conjuring up the entire spectacle of UFOs themselves?
It's a fascinating theory. I can see why it's really picked up a lot of steam and become quite a talked about theory in general, just because it's really, once you sort of start applying it to the UFO phenomenon and all the tangential elements to it, you just run a gamut of interesting sort of reactions.
Yeah, it kind of resurrects this kook factor, the shaver factor, and all these very extremely pulp, ludicrous things that, nevertheless, while they were inaccurate, might have struck a chord, and people might have recognized some sort of element of plausibility in it, even though they were made out to be so ridiculous. And, I think this offers a more substantial way of looking at some of these mysteries that have been hashed around since the pulp era.
As you said, this thing sort of picked up steam in the last year or so, and notably in the last few months, I've seen you appearing on a lot of programs and stuff like that, and discussing. Yeah,
I'm working on a book too.
What's that?
Working on a book too.
Yep. And working on the book, and it seems like the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis really has become the talk of the UFO circles lately. So what would you say the general reaction to the crypto theory has been?
Now, the general reaction has been, depending on who you speak to, it's been one of outright rage. Outright. Oh my God! What's ufology come to? To one of, hey, okay, this is good, but he needs to show evidence. He needs to elaborate on this a little bit, mm-hmm. which is entirely a fair criticism. Obviously, I can't just, we're dealing with little diminutive humanoids and. With different genetic caste systems to interact with us in different contexts, and that's the explanation. That's not, that's the general flavor of my argument, but I don't pretend to expect anyone to take that as gospel. Yeah. So I need to elaborate on it, and I'm also not going to pretend that it's going to be any more than a hypothesis. But I do think that it's every bit as valid as the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and that's probably tooting my horn a little bit. But it is original to me in its modern incarnation, in the contemporary incarnation in which I'm using it. But I'm also drawing on things by Valee and Keel and other people, and just synthesizing it into something a little more material, something a little more accessible in light of what we know about technology and anthropology. So it's a new slant, and I think it's a new way of addressing the UFO enigma that you can't exclude for any intellectually valid reason. Yeah. So it's gonna polarize people just like anything else, and that's a good thing ultimately because it results in some useful friction.
Yeah, well, I think it's exciting too that there's a new way of looking at this entire phenomenon in a way that you're championing, just because it does bring a freshness to the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a fresh way of looking at it. I always appreciated that. I think books like Communion that obviously have had a deep impact in the public's collective unconscious had that same questioning quality, and I think people enjoy that questioning quality, the ability to suspend the typical banter about believers and debunkers and look at things anew and wonder about things.
Yeah.
I think that people like that and appreciate the chance to do that, even though the media is almost always apathetic to that. I mean, it's much more profitable and much easier to present everything in terms of black and white.
Yeah.
And I'm offering a shade of gray that seems to have elicited some interest, and that's gratifying because it means maybe I'm not just nuts.
Now, do you speculate at all on the origins of the CTs? In how they came about? Have they been here all along? You sort of allude to the idea that they evolved sort of as an offshoot of us or something. But
yeah, I think that they evolved as an offshoot of us. I think there are different kinds of them. I think that they are genetically quite powerful. I think they're genetic engineers. I think that's one ability that they have well, they would have to have it if they're actually infusing themselves with human DNA as part of some sort of hybridization program or whatnot. Then yeah, they would have to have some degree of genetic flair, and I think that's one aspect of their arsenal that shouldn't be underestimated.
Maybe they just want to be taller.
Taller, maybe they just want to be able to see in the dark and everything. But you look at the gray, the drone-like gray with the big eyes and the small frame, and it's in the pale complexion, and it's tempting to wonder if this is some sort of specialized template for perhaps nocturnal work. If this is some sort of, or maybe these things, you have all kinds of reports of tunnel systems, and I'm going into folklore here, with reports of little humanoids and mines and things like that. Yeah. But you have to wonder if some of these little dwarf-like creatures are actually from underground habitats, underground facilities, and if they are in some sense manufactured as to be like a whole helper caste. Yeah. I get this feeling that we're dealing with a genetic caste system, kind of like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World sometimes, where you have the more human-like beings, sometimes so human that they're called the blondes, or the Nordics, which seems very new agey until you start looking at it. That's another little aspect of the whole UFO abduction problem that seems to make more sense in light of a cryptoterrestrial origin and rather than an extraterrestrial origin. But then you have beings like the so-called mantis-looking things. Yeah. And I'm convinced that a lot of this is noise produced by the whole culture of hypnotherapy and people, desperate for answers. And I'm not couching everything I'm saying on hypnotically derived testimony by any means. But when things recalled under hypnosis seem to evoke folklore in ways that seem very unlikely for the person being regressed to just spontaneously start talking about. It makes me wonder if there's some kernel, some little nugget of truth at the bottom of that's responsible. So yeah, I think that the cryptoterrestrials are not. I'm not talking about an organization, a coherent organization of individuals that are all on the same team. Yeah. I think it's more of a planet-wide phenomenon. In fact, I was made aware of some interesting documents through Nick Redfern of in World War II, apparently some humanoid beings were sighted on some islands off Japan, I believe. And they were human-like but small and odd and unrecognized and uncatalogued. Yeah, not a known race of people, and they were on this island, doing their own thing. And this is back to the Hobbit question again. This is, if true, this is kind of a proof of concept, if nothing else, that human-like or essentially human intelligence can exist right on this planet with us. It's been said before, but I think it bears repetition that we know less about the surface of our own planet than we do the moon.
Yeah.
And
especially with all the water.
Especially with the oceans, right. And I can't help but think, given the repeated folkloric references to beings emerging from bodies of water to impart knowledge to humanity, etc., and coupled with the modern reports of craft emerging from water and flying saucers entering and exiting bodies of water, that there's a connection there. Below the surface of lakes and oceans would be a good hiding place, if nothing else.
These cryptos you say they're kind of all over the world, but not organized. So we could be dealing with the human race and multiple different crypto races.
Yeah, basically, different crypto races. Some of them are a little more savvy than others. Some of them might actually not. So, well, it's going back to the cryptid theory, of Bigfoot, and all these hairy dwarves seen in South America and things like that.
Yeah,
and a lot of these sightings, interestingly enough, are kind of thrown into the whole ufological repertoire. Where we're dealing with possible UFO pilots, and when I read a report about little highly aggressive hairy dwarves attacking people in South America, I have trouble imagining these beings piloting flying saucers. They seem more to me like maybe a remnant population of an offshoot that didn't make it.
Yeah.
And, they could be extinct by now. So on that same token, maybe some of these primates, some of these mystery primates that seem to stalk the world are, the less advanced cousins of the cryptoterrestrial intelligence. And the beings known as Bigfoot, as much as I deplore that term, could be, it just has such cheesy connotations. Yeah. But these could, if they're real, they could very well be just a form of cryptoterrestrial that's not very advanced. You can't look at any culture and try to find one without a folkloric tradition of small beings, usually from the sky, with some interest in human reproduction.
Yeah. And
whether this is some sort of Jungian phenomena that we don't know how to assess, or whether it's some sort of buried memory. My guess is that there's some physical substantiation for it, and that the cryptoterrestrial idea accommodates it in a way that the ETH doesn't.
The only other really sort of question I kind of have is that, and you kind of touched on this already in a way, to use the old-fashioned super generic, why don't they land on the White House lawn type of thing, but in a sense, and especially in our politically correct culture nowadays, I mean, they're a special interest group. I'm surprised they don't have, their own month to celebrate, hobbits and that kind of thing. How come the hobbits haven't asserted? I'm just calling them hobbits now. How come the cryptoterrestrials haven't asserted themselves to get a better stake in their voice on what's going on in the world?
Well, I mentioned earlier they're desperate. I didn't really expand on that. I think they're fragile and vulnerable, numerically and otherwise. I think that they're possibly a remnant population, and if you're that kind of a minority, I don't think it's a very good idea to advertise your presence.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be exploited one way or another.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to be the way they do things, and I for one don't blame them. So that's my little pat explanation for why they don't approach the UN and demand their own country or something.
All right, yeah, that makes sense, and then they could end up in a zoo or something. So they might.
They could easily wind up in the zoo or its laboratory equivalent, right? And I don't think that would be in their best interests at all. I think right now they still have us by the reins. Yeah. At least in many critical respects, and they're not going to blow that until perhaps they have to, and we don't appear to be at that point yet. Whether we will at some point in the future is an interesting question. Whether we continue to torch the planet with the greenhouse effect or something, and until it results in some sort of ecological collapse, whether they might feel the need to make themselves known at that point because they feel they have nothing to lose. That's possible.
Yeah. if we encroach on their situation.
Right. It might get to the point where they take up arms, so to speak. Maybe not literally, but nevertheless make themselves known in order to set things right.
Yeah.
According to their own definition of right, and we might not. We might not like that, given their ability to infiltrate and pull off lots of what amounts to kidnapping at will. Yeah.
You alluded to a book, and I wanted to know about that. And where's this crypto-terrestrial theory go from here? More research, obviously, and sort of trying to tie up the loose ends in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm continuing to elaborate and trying to flesh out the theories that I've been talking to you about with some more cases, because there are actually some cases that are highly illustrative of this, and one of these is the V.S. Boas abduction.
Okay, yeah,
I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this is a case of a farmer who, for 3 consecutive nights, saw these red lights in the sky, like he's being observed, and then finally he gets abducted by these suited beings. He doesn't get a good look at him, but he proceeds to have intercourse with this extremely human-looking being. And you were asking earlier about physical characteristics of these beings.
Yeah.
And again, this woman that he had sex with is predominantly human. The fact that he's having intercourse with her, I mean, obviously that argues that she's pretty much human, but she's got interesting characteristics. She has big eyes, she's very pale. And if you look at some of the illustrations of her, you immediately think of the cover of Communion. There are some superficial similarities there that lead me to believe that the gray is an exaggeration, kind of a racial caricature, if you will.
Yeah, of the crypto.
Of the cryptos, right.
Interesting. And so, like you said, you got the book. What's the timetable on the book situation? And
I'm not sure. I don't have a deadline. I do, however, have a publisher, and I'm hoping. I'm hoping to get this out this year, and hopefully, I won't have any. It's a publisher. It's a print-on-demand publisher, and it's the same editor I had for the. That I had for the Mars book, and he likes the idea, and he's been I think pretty supportive of the whole question. So hopefully I won't run into the same problems I've had with the distribution for the Mars book.
Yeah.
So people who are interested in this can actually get their hands on a hard copy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And do you have a title for the book yet?
I'm calling it, the working title is The Cryptoterrestrials, and then the subtitle is Indigenous Humanoids and the Aliens Among Us. And I couldn't think of anything better. In fact, I didn't even think of the term cryptoterrestrials. I was using ultra-terrestrials, which is John Keel's word, and I had forgotten that he termed that. I was like, oh, that doesn't work. I don't want to make it sound like I'm just rehashing his ideas.
Yeah.
And somebody on my blog recommended cryptoterrestrials, and that just kind of stuck. Before ultra-terrestrials, I was calling them crypto-hominids, but that's too much like Lauren Coleman territory,
Yeah, then you're into the
and I didn't. That gave the wrong impression. So, intraterrestrials was a close call. That sounds kind of cool.
Intraterrestrials,
yeah.
Interesting.
Kind of like. I like that. I like that. I like the way that sounds, and it actually gets the meaning across. But cryptoterrestrials, I think, has cachet.
Yeah.
And I like that term, so I'm going to use that.
It's got some meme to it.
Yeah, it's a good meme, and it seems to have flourished. People seem comfortable using it. Well, we live in the Dan Brown generation, with the Da Vinci Code, and huge historical riddles and things like this are really big. Whether it's the bloodline of Christ or the bloodline of humanity itself, and the crypto, the very preface crypto, is very cryptic, and I think that appeals to people. There seems to be this huge interest in things like that, and justifiably so.
I feel this is exciting, and there's an exciting air to it almost. This is something new and exciting, and I feel like we're just at the beginning of what may turn out to be quite an interesting new branch of investigation into the UFO, ET, blah, blah, blah phenomenon.
Well, yeah, because since it is a hypothesis, it should be possible to perhaps look. I was just reading an article about junk DNA, for example, there are some explanations about what junk DNA is, but perhaps they're wrong. Perhaps we should take a closer look and see if this could be, hypothetically attributed to genetic intervention in the past, because if these meddling cryptoterrestrial beings are engineering themselves, then perhaps they're also engineering us in some respects as well. We could be part of their ambient environment, just as the inanimate world is. So there's another disturbing idea, another paranoid disturbing idea to play with.
I really look forward to getting my hands on this book when it's done and seeing where you take this cryptoterrestrial theory, because I had heard about it through Paul Kimball earlier on in the year.
He's been supportive of it, insofar as that, he's saying, look, he's just asking, and some people don't get that, but Paul gets that. Yeah,
and I've sort of slowly watched this buzz grow around the cryptoterrestrial theory, and like I said, it's exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes.
Well, that makes two of us.
And then to sort of move on and look at some stuff in the big picture, and that's the UFO phenomenon in general. Ufology, really, the field, not so much the UFO phenomenon. We've discussed that ad nauseum, really, but the ufology field in general. And to start out, we'll sort of tackle one of the big talking points on the show, and you're one of the better people to talk about it with, and that's the young people and ufology. I've almost beat this topic to death, but I think we can still wring a little bit more out of it. Because as you said, you're 31, I'm going to be 28 next week. We're young guys, especially in the field of ufology. There seems to be a growing problem that I've been trying to address on the program, and that is the lack of young people in ufology. Talk about this problem, which as I see it, that is that ufology doesn't seem to be drawing in young people anymore, and what can we do about sort of changing that scenario?
I think one of the primary obstacles right now is the media. I think the media just continually insults our intelligence on matters of the unknown.
Yeah.
For example, I was flown out to Albuquerque for a Discovery Channel documentary, and it was a fun trip, and I got to see a bunch of cool stuff, and they spent a whole day interviewing me. And, in the interview segment, I was in this, they lit up this I was in this theater all by myself, and they put the lights on me and everything. And, they're asking me these questions, but they're very leading questions, about whether what I believe, here and believe there, and I'm qualifying these questions with, what do you mean by believe, or define cover up, things like this. And of course, I don't make the cut, even though I thought I was much more articulate than the people who did. And I think the answer is pretty obvious. I think either I think more highly of my screen presence than I should, which I can't rule that out. But at the same time, I think I was dodging this binary thought problem, and I think I was veering away from this very either or mentality that it seems to be part and parcel of the way the media treats any topic that smacks of the unknown or the unfamiliar, and UFOs included, obviously.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I think the big problem right now is the media's treatment. It's been addicted to the same treatment for so long that I don't remember a time when there was an open inquiry, when there was a true open-minded approach.
Yeah,
it's always the same thing. The last time I watched a UFO documentary was the Peter Jennings thing, and I thought the first half of it was really pretty good. And in the second half was just like, oh my God, this is horrible. Back to the same old thing.
Yeah.
And the whole, you trot out some person who has no expertise, knows nothing about the subject, but has a PhD in astronomy or something, and to say that it's nonsense, and then have some abductee on it. And I'm not ragging on abductees, but it's not the strongest.
Yeah.
If we need to be focusing on ufology, the serious aspects of ufology, we shouldn't ignore the abduction phenomena. That would be quite stupid. But it's not. The phenomena does not fall or stand on the abduction aspect. The phenomenon falls or stands on the evidence that there are such things as UFOs, and my answer to the debate around that is that of course there are, and too often we forget what unidentified flying object means. It does not entail extraterrestrial spaceship. And in the debunker's mind, it does, and in the media's mind, it does.
Yeah.
And, some people have advanced new terms for this. Ivan Sanderson trying to do it, and Paul Kimball's advocated unexplained aerial phenomena, which is maybe fair enough, but I don't think we should apologize for the term UFO. I think it makes perfect sense. And I don't think we need to start trying to disassociate it from the connotations it's developed.
Yeah.
It's a semantic issue.
Let me sort of focus in a little bit on your response and the question a little bit, only because the media issue is definitely a problem for ufology, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't sort of address the still overarching problem of the lack of young people.
Yeah.
Is there... now, I've thrown out some of my own theories lately on why it might be going on. Obviously, you have to factor in the ridicule factor and just that young people are in general busy with their own crazy lives. And also, I find lately that the 9/11 movement has stolen all of our young people. They're all anyone who would be involved in the esoteric that's young is doing 9/11 now.
Good point. Yeah, the people with the Jones for conspiracy have been sucked into the 9/11 thing.
Yeah.
And well, that might be a good thing. We might not need those people after all, but nevertheless, you have a very good point there.
Is there a methodology or a tact we can take, do you think, that could draw more young people in, or are we just going to have to rely on people like you and me and John Greenwald and other people to sort of come out of the woodwork?
Well, the answer, I think, is the internet. And I mean, the buzz term of the last few years online, aside from Web 2.0, is social networking, and technologies like YouTube and MySpace.
Yeah.
UFOs are not friendly to these subjects, or rather to these media, or rather these media are not friendly to UFOs. But that can change. How many ufologists have MySpace pages, for example?
Maybe a dozen.
If that,
half dozen.
That's more than I thought. It's still not enough. We need to see more of that. We also need to see more mainstream scientists who are willing to have the guts to realize that associating their names with the UFO inquiry does not equal professional suicide. Bernard Hayes is an example of a very qualified scientist who has legitimate interest in UFOs and understands what the term means, which is more than you can say for many. And we need more like him. We need more scientists who are willing to put, just have the guts to ask a question, to pose a question. Why not? Kaku is another one who's been, he doesn't have any problem with it. UFOs, yes, it's a mystery. Give me one reason why they can't be visitors from somewhere else. And we need to see more people who are willing to do that. And right now, we're still seeing the effects of the Condon Committee and other efforts like that to just absolutely dispel any credence given to the UFO inquiry. And that's what it is. It's an inquiry. If we look at it as a media problem and not a scientific problem for those people who are uncomfortable, discussing it in scientific terms, if they stick to their own respective disciplines and treat it as a media problem or a question of sociological importance, Jaques Valee, I'm sure, would agree with that. Then there again, computer science. There's a huge need for catalog data and analysis of data and finding correlations and signals in the noise that have nothing to do with extraterrestrial or cryptoterrestrial intelligence. It's simply a matter of finding trends. And you look at websites. There's a really good one called Information Aesthetics that has stunning examples of very involving visual ways of mapping data and mapping trends. And, we need to see some of these tools brought to bear on the UFO problem in its many, many, many manifestations.
I should point out that actually, ironically enough, Ryan Wood's working on a similar project along those lines. called UFO decks. I don't know. I think I might have mentioned it to you before. No,
yeah, you mentioned it, and I'd kind of forgotten about that. But yeah, that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah. And do you think it's sort of, with regards to the young people, just to go back to that one last time, do you think it's sort of, we seem to be in a down period here for ufology and UFO research?
You mean like because there hasn't been some huge sighting that's galvanized, the community?
Not so much that.
I don't think we should be at the mercy of whether there's a wave of sightings or not.
No, that's not where I'm going. I'm more saying along the lines of 10 years ago the X-Files was huge and looking into UFOs was cool. And now it's sort of, there's not really a big buzz around ufology as there was maybe back then. It was sort of, are we a victim here of the ebb and flow of popularity as far as ufology goes? Right.
The X-Files made the paranormal sexy, but they didn't necessarily make it intelligent. And there's a difference, and there's nothing wrong with sexy, and we could do with some more of that. Instead now we have things like Mythbusters and things like that. And I don't have a television, so it's hard for me to keep track of them all. Yeah, I don't watch TV. I'm turned off. And some people really chastise me for that. But Kimball's one of them.
It's surprising, but I'll hold my tongue.
But I have trouble with. But I'm at the same time I try to keep track of what's going on without actually sitting down and watching 2 hours of television and attendant commercials. And we have we've become more cynical. And we have bullshit by Penn and Teller,
yeah.
Right? And some it's one of those things that it's like Michael Shermer. He's really good when he's talking about things he knows about, like revisionist history and the reality of Noah's Ark and things like that. Known absurdities where you can just effortless. It's like drowning kittens deflating these myths. But you get to something thorny like UFOs, and you have an hour, if that, to address the entire mystery, then you're bound to fall short. So yeah, we're going through a cynical time right now, I think. That's my general impression. The UFOs, of course, were very cynical too, but the cynicism was aimed more at the authorities and the government. And it did that very cleverly by making the two main characters FBI agents. But now, the whole abduction thing seems to have run out of steam. Everyone is so familiar with it that it doesn't even make for a clever beer commercial anymore.
In discussing sort of the ebb and flow of popularity, I'm almost more interested in just recruiting than the quality of the research. I mean, the good people will show up eventually as long as we bring in enough people. But it seems like I'm worried that we're not bringing in enough people. I don't know.
Gary McKinnon?
I'm not sure. I think his UFO investigating days may be over.
I think they might be too.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, I suppose.
Yeah, on the team.
What's that?
It depends which side of the team, which team you're on, I guess.
Yeah, and then
more than 2 teams.
What's that? Well, actually,
far more than 2 teams.
That sort of brings me to another question. I'll jump to that one in a way, because I was thinking about this last night when I was preparing for the interview, is that nowadays ufology seems to be broken into some sub-camps here that's going on, and there's the old school. I tried to come up with them. Maybe you can help me here. The old school, where I put like the Friedmans, the Maccabees, MUFON, and that sort of crew. That's the old school.
I agree with that one.
The exopolitics. Then the new school is sort of like the Kimballs, the Nick Redfern, Greg Bishop, that sort of crew of people that are sort of fresh to the ideas. And
the funny thing about the new school, like Redfern and Bishop, is that they're very well versed in old school Fortean stuff.
Yeah.
That before was excluded from ufology because it didn't seem to have anything to do with it. Well, it has everything to do with it, but we're just now realizing that again. Collectively, these guys have known it forever.
So you think it's a situation where these new guys are bringing in all the disciplines together in a way?
Yeah, I think it needs to be as inclusive as possible, and not for political reasons, but for the simple fact that the UFO phenomenon is but a single aspect of a much bigger thing. It's not just this. It's like trying to define biology and just stick with biology and ignore the rest of the planet when there's an obvious interface between the biosphere and the planet itself. So yeah, people like Mick Redfern and Greg Bishop are just very refreshingly informed in a way that your old school isn't.
Now, where do you think the field in general really needs to go? Do you think that these camps have to come to some kind of collective agreement, or is it just going to keep fighting each other?
I think the phenomenon wants us to come to a collective agreement. And I don't think that's in our best interests. I think we need to just become questioners. I think we need to continue questioning this with everything we've got, and only come to some sort of agreement when it's really called for. Right now, I see little room, little reason for agreement. Everything seems pretty contradictory. The phenomenon contradicts itself, and the authorities contradict themselves. There's many levels of cover up that have nothing to do with Men in Black, and we need to swallow our pride, I suppose, and deal with this as the conundrum of questions that it is. And I think personally, it's much more interesting when viewed as this layer upon layer of unacknowledged weirdness. It's kind of like exploring some new territory. And I think that could possibly be made sexy in a way that the X-Files predisposition for crash saucers and alien bodies and things like that, tapped into during the 1990s. I think fiction is a very powerful medium, and we're seeing very, very little ufological fiction. You see hardly any UFO science fiction. One thing I've talked about before with various people is that you'd think there'd be a crossover. For someone who's not in either camp, you'd think there'd be a crossover between science fiction and ufology. You'd think they'd make natural allies, and they're anything but. They're oil and water. And there needs to be an overlap there that so far has not really been addressed at all, outside of a couple books by Whitley Strieber and a book by Ian Watson and a couple others. And fiction's a very, very good way of conveying ideas, and we need to use that. We need to see some informed fiction that deals with hard existential questions pertaining to the reality of the UFO phenomenon. But we're not going to see that until we have authors who know what they're talking about and who are willing to exploit fiction for more than its commercial potential, because people equate UFOs with ETs and think ETs are cool.
Sort of to go back to what I was talking about a little bit, what about the sort of disagreement is as far as methodology of what to do about the UFO phenomenon with these split camps in the UFO field? Like the exopolitics people they're pushing the government, and then sort of the new school people are more into the investigation, and then you also have the subgroups that are all focused on individual portions of the investigation.
I think we need to put less emphasis on the organizations and more emphasis on individual reports. I think there's where you're going to find your treasure trove of truly illuminating testimony from individuals. I think organizations invariably put a spin on it, even when they try not to. I think anything filtered through MUFON is eventually going to be tinted with the extraterrestrial meme, and we need to get away from that. Nothing wrong with MUFON, but there's nothing wrong with organizations per se, but they have a tendency to project their own belief structure onto any given report, and I'm for the complete destruction of the whole regime. I'm kind of an anarchist when it comes to UFOs, because I don't think I see exopolitics, and that's the most overt manifestation of this. That's the most recognizably political, of all these agendas. But all these people have agendas. It's not just the exopolitical movement, and some of the agendas aren't necessarily wrong, but they're limiting. They have a certain limiting effect, and I think we need to go straight to the people who are experiencing this weirdness, regardless if it seems to be a UFO-related experience on the face of it, and go from there and see where these patterns take us, and bring the computing ability that's within everyone's grasp now. Everyone has a computer. Bring this ubiquitous tool to bear on it in a way that's engaging to the senses.
Sort of like the layer upon layer, and going to the source came to mind was the Skinwalker Ranch story. That kind of that sort of thing would be kind of maybe what you're talking about.
It is. It's a good crossover because it doesn't. I just saw it on the bookshelves last night actually at Barnes and Noble, and it's lumped in with metaphysics, which isn't necessarily a good thing because my Mars book was lumped in with metaphysics, but. And it has nothing to do with metaphysics. But yeah, at least it wasn't pigeonholed as UFO or I think the Borders bookstore has a much better sensibility about it because they have a section labeled speculation. Yeah, that's okay. That's pretty good. I can deal with that. I think some of the titles in speculation could very well be in the science section. In many cases should be in the science section. But speculation is better than occult, some arbitrary corporate term, like that.
There's definitely a public relations problem with the esoteric in general.
Yeah, how do you market ideas that have no market?
Exactly. It's so fringe that it's limited by its own fringeness. And
exactly. You have to define it by weird, lame corporate terminology for people to even recognize it. And consequently, they don't know the entirety. They don't know the whole story. I mean, neither do any of us, but at least some of us have an inkling that there's a deeper waters to be explored than just a daylight disk photographed over a city or something like that. It's not just a matter of addressing the possibilities of whether we're being visited by aliens and nuts and bolts spacecraft. And that's one aspect of it, hauling in the old Drake equation and things like that. But you can only get so far, and I think we've reached a cul-de-sac, and we might very well see the extinction of ufology within a generation or two, unless we take some measure to redefine how we approach it. It's not so much a marketing decision as a way of as an ontological decision, just totally reformatting the way in which we perceive strange things. And you hear about 2012 and the end of the Mayan calendar and how there's going to be some imminent change in the way in consciousness. I don't believe it for a minute, but it would be nice if suddenly, bam, all of a sudden everyone's able to see the bigger picture, or at least have the faculties honed fine enough to be able to see the bigger picture, if indeed there is one, as I think there is.
You kind of touch on sort of like this nagging feeling that I've had in the last couple of years since I got into the whole esoteric field, and that is that ufology is kind of broken. I'm not sure how it got broken or how we can fix it, but it feels broken.
It started off with a lot of steam, and with like Kehoe and NICAP. And lots of very, very progressive thinking behind it. And since then it's gone through lots of concentrated disinformation, which is something that in the early era it's hard to see where that came into play. But now you've got the MJ-12 controversy, which I consider disinformation, and lots of the alien abductions exploited by the media because they have such obvious commercial potential. We're left in this kind of post-ufological state where the phenomena that we're investigating may or may not even have anything to do with the phenomena. What we're trying to address is just kind of a residue of leftover ideas that are being rehashed on late night radio ad nauseum. And I don't. Another confession: I don't listen to late night radio. I listen to various internet radio at times, but half the time I just can't stand it when I hear the typical goings on coast to coast. Nothing against the show. I think it's entertaining. I just don't think it's progressive from a research perspective. It's entertainment. It doesn't pretend to be anything else.
Obviously, you're a prolific blogger, and you've been doing the online thing for quite some time. Like you said, you had a blog before blogs were blogs. So, what do you think of the ufology scene on the internet? Because that's sort of the cutting edge of ufology, I guess, only because it's updated every day.
I think the future of ufology is going to be largely online. We're already seeing some significant steps there, and have been for a while. Right now, I'm not too impressed. The majority of the discussion groups and stuff seem to be fairly limited. For example, if you do a search for UFO on YouTube, I do sometimes looking for weird things. The commentary is dismal. These people don't even know how to spell, let alone post a coherent thought on something. and it's all very knee-jerk. And a lot of the footage circulating has been known for 10 years to be fake. I'm not talking controversial. I'm talking about known to be fake. And people are still posting this stuff. And, no, this can't be real. No, it's real. No, it can't be real. And this definitely needs to be phased out. We have all this. Well, it comes back to Theodore Sturgeon's law. When asked why 99 or 90% of science fiction was so awful, he said, well, it's because 90% of everything is awful. And he has a very good point. It's the same thing applies to ufology. I mean, 90% of it's so bad because everything is. It's just that we approach ufology with a very critical eye because we expect and deserve more.
There are some good elements to ufology on the internet in a sense.
Oh yeah, there's some good elements, but they're few and far between. That remaining, it's just and finding them is hard.
Part of where that was going was especially with regards to like this cryptoterrestrial idea. It does, in some pockets, like your blog, for instance, it does allow for the germination of new ideas.
True, but also my blog is not a UFO blog.
Yeah, well, I'm speaking more in general terms.
Half the time I'm writing about things that could have nothing less in common with UFOs. But yeah, I guess maybe it is a UFO blog. People recognize it as that. But I've also seen it, interestingly enough, listed on some technology blogs as a technology blog, because I like to comment on, I like to write about our own future a lot. Yeah. And I think the issue of our own trajectory into the next century is a vital aspect of assessing the possibilities in which by which extraterrestrials might choose to make contact with us. So there's definite crossover there, and you've also got this friction between the so-called transhumanists and who want nothing to do with UFOs because they consider it infantile superstition, basically. Of course, they know nothing about it, but that makes no difference at all. They just don't want to be colored by it or seen, in the same room with it. And on a certain level, I don't blame them. But yeah, some people don't like me because I like writing about subjects like the future and our own future and our chances and what we're going to be doing with our technology and the future of the human body, whether we're going to integrate with machines in a meaningful, productive manner or whether we're going to suffer some sort of massive biospheric collapse before we reach the point where that's possible. Well, whether we're going to transcend ourselves to the point where we're more or less a fixture of the cosmos. Because right now, I think we're very fragile and essentially a pretty ephemeral planetary phenomenon. We might not be here for another 200 years, and that's of great concern to me. And I think that's a question that should have great bearing on the whole issue of UFOs as well, because UFOs, you tend to think of extraterrestrials, and once you do that, you might as well start thinking about, well, assuming we're being visited by extraterrestrials, which is the most common interpretation of the word, unfortunately. Now, let's make the most of it and start wondering about how these presumed extraterrestrials got to the point where they can visit us, because that's something that I think would be very good for us to be doing, visiting other star systems, and I think a lot of other people would agree with that. That's eminently worth doing, and exploration is definitely worth pursuing, and we're not doing that right now. Right now, we're going in circles around Earth and in orbit. So it's a very weird landscape and lots of infighting, and I think we're always going to have infighting as long as we're talking about weird ideas. As long as an idea isn't couched in the workaday here and now, as long as it as long as it's out there and not a daily part of your life, then it's going to be scorned. Because unfortunately, most people are content with going to work and coming home and watching TV.
And you don't even own a TV, so
It doesn't make me better than anyone.
No, I know.
I just don't have that interest.
I'm just busting your chops.
Yeah, I know.
Being that you and I are so young, and these mysteries have been with us for a long time, and I'm not just talking about the UFO mystery, really, but also like the Mars mystery, and even Bigfoot and all those crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea when we're going to find out any answers to these things, and are you hopeful for any answers to any of these subjects in our lifetime?
I'll pick the Bigfoot one.
Okay. Oh, nice. All right.
Okay. Because here's something that should be testable. Nick Redfern thinks Bigfoot is like a thought projection of sorts.
Really?
In which case we might never know. But if Bigfoot is a flesh and blood primate living in seclusion, then we're losing that seclusion. The forests are coming down. And the world is becoming a hotter, drier place, and the remaining forests are starting to burn. The Amazon, there's a very good chance the Amazon will be toast in 20 years, in which case it's going to be very hard to breathe. If some of these things come to pass, then there's going to be less and less habitat for this hypothetical species of hominid, and we should know. So that's testable. That makes it a testable hypothesis whether this species exists. Because sooner or later it's going to have to show itself, because there's not going to be anywhere else to live. So there's a very bleak but practical answer to the mystery of certain cryptids, alleged cryptids.
And what about the big dog here, the UFO phenomenon? Cryptoterrestrial, extraterrestrial, either way, whatever. Do you think we're ever going to find out in our lifetime, or is this going to be something that 2 generations from now we're going to be old school, and the new school will be talking about how, you and I are like 60 and I've been doing it for 30 years and don't have an answer either?
Well, that implies that we have a future as a species. That would actually please me to no end if we're 60 and there are people talking about it. But nevertheless, I think I'm generally comfortable making only a couple of assertions about UFOs, and I think one of them is that they're intelligent. I think it represents a form of non-human intelligence. Yeah, I think that's a reasonably safe conjecture, and I also think that UFOs are physical, and that they operate on a level of reality where we can, at least in theory, if we had one, we could take it into a laboratory and look at it, because they do leave physical effects. And given those two things, it's tempting to wonder what it might have in store for us. It might not have anything in store for us. It might be some sort of automated system that just keeps the game going. Maybe it's an evolutionary catalyst that just keeps showing us possible futures through the medium of mythology in order to keep us on our toes, and possibly in order to keep us from destroying ourselves. And that's one thing that, if it's cryptoterrestrial in origin, that might be one of the primary reasons we keep seeing structures in our skies that have no readily apparent origin. Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of possibilities here, and I don't think we have enough. Contrary to the exopoliticians and others, I don't think we have all the answers yet. I think this is one of the most significant phenomena ever to occur, and I think we need to address it with the requisite perseverance and open-mindedness. And right now, given the state of the media, that's not going to happen. We need a drastic mutation. We need to mutate to accommodate this phenomenon, and that might be what it's asking us to do. I mean, it might be. Jaques Valee talked about the psychosocial thermostat. How it's constantly just out of touch. That might be the whole point. But maybe it is actually some sort of very patient, abiding form of intelligence that is kind of nudging us towards a new state of thought. And given the predicted technological singularity, which is sometime around 2020, it's tempting to wonder if there's even a connection between the two. If there is some sort of common element between our own homegrown technological progress and the more archetypal progress charted by the UFO mystery. through history. I think it's a pretty deep subject with no clear answers, and that's not shedding a lot of light, saying anything that no one else has said. But at least I feel that I'm making the right decision and not proclaiming that it's this or that.
Yeah.
My interests lie in questioning it and approaching it in new ways. And if people don't like that, then that's fine. But I do, and I think that's a worthwhile endeavor.
Oh, definitely. I think we need more of that attitude and less of the proclamation. Less proclamation and more speculation. I don't know. I'm trying to find a nice way to say it. Less proclamation and more trying just to investigate it.
Yeah.
And now I was checking out your bio here. We're heading towards the end, and I was looking at your bio, and it says you're a member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that.
The Society for Planetary SETI Research, I mentioned some scientists that were interested in the whole looking for artifacts on other planets. And we've fallen into this very unfortunate paradigm where the reigning scientific mainstream is telling us that, if there's evidence to be found of extraterrestrials, it's not going to be through UFOs or anything else. It's going to be through radio transmissions from other star systems. And there's nothing theoretically unsound about that. It could very well be that's how you make first contact. But that's not the only option. And another option is that there are artifacts left on planetary surfaces, such as the Moon, Mars, farther out, maybe orbiting by themselves, in our solar system. And there's nothing at all theoretically unsound or weird about this. I mean, even staunch SETI defenders like Carl Sagan were very keen on the idea that our solar system might be home to alien artifacts. Possibly automated observing stations or bases, or the remains of past visitations, if not necessarily active alien bases. And so the Society for Planetary SETI Research is just an academic, a group of academics who are interested in pursuing this and looking for evidence of past visitation by ETs and assessing it with the best technology that we have. And I'm on board because of my book, but everyone else pretty much has a doctorate at least, or a PhD. So I mean, it's an invisible college scenario. We have a bunch of qualified people who are interested in this subject, but you never hear about them. Instead, you hear about Richard Hoagland, and no surprise, Richard Hoagland and his website bashes, the SPSR for not being a team player, I guess, because they don't agree with everything that Richard Hoagland says.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about polarization. That's unfortunate.
Some people just want to own Mars research and make it their own and not open it up to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a product. This is an inquiry. It's not commodity.
And now, in sort of along that realm in a way, and I had this disagreement with somebody who was involved in a different SETI type organization, and not the SETI that we know and loathe. That is, Seth Shostak's SETI. And you probably had nothing to do with this, but maybe you can speak to it. Why would you? I guess, from my understanding, the SETI acronym has been around longer than SETI itself, the organization we're talking about.
Yeah. A lot of people assume that SETI is like a building somewhere, full of radio astronomers.
Yeah, exactly. And the argument that I'd gotten in with this person was, well, why would you even get yourself involved with something using the SETI acronym just because it's been so sullied by the SETI organization? I don't know. What do you think of that?
A lot of people get the wrong idea. They think SETI is just like UFO is synonymous with alien spacecraft. Unfortunately, too much of the time, SETI has become synonymous with radio astronomy. And SETI, it's a search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and that can take many forms. And it's vague enough that I think other people should feel free to appropriate it and use it for their own uses, like SPSR. Society for Planetary SETI Research. Planetary SETI makes sense. It's a search. It's SETI, but it's specifying that we're looking on planets. That's our area of expertise. That's what we're doing. And SETI, I think, is a little too cavalier in their use of the term SETI because it's very prepossessing that SETI is inseparable from the radio astronomical search for signals from space.
I think
there needs to be a distinction made between SETI, between radio SETI. I think they should be called radio SETI or EM SETI or something like that, to make it clear that what they're doing is it's not searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, but searching for signals of extraterrestrial origin, and there's a pretty critical difference there. For example, they have no interest in UFOs. They issue ignorant remarks about UFOs in order to debunk it, because that would tend to make their efforts look rather silly if UFOs are indeed extraterrestrial spacecraft. Yeah, I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying that's, it's a political stumbling block for them. And so there's nothing wrong with the acronym. But like all organizations that rely on acronyms, I'm a little wary of just instinctively.
It's problematic only because of the SETI organizations co-opted the acronym and kind of taken it as their own.
Yeah, they've taken it as their own, and too often we see younger startup organizations who are trying to try different methods. They feel that it somehow benefits them from latching on to the SETI acronym. It makes them sound somehow more scientific. And I support Radio SETI. I think it's a valid thing to do, but sometimes I question how scientific they are about it. I think it's at least 50% PR. Yeah. PR SETI.
Well, I'd like to see the funding for SETI spread out a little bit to different versions of SETI and not just the radio version. But
as of a few years ago, it turned out that the SETI loves to make fun of the UFO cultists making money off their wares. It turns out that, at least as of like 3 years ago, I think, SETI was the number one nonprofit institute in the United States with the highest percentage of its income going to its administrators.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So talk about a cottage industry. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black.
That just pretty much explains why they're so vehement about.
Oh yeah, I think SETI it's not following the aliens, it's following the money.
Sort of a fun question here before we wrap it up, and I was searching through your blog, looking around a little bit, and I wanted to ask you about Women and Children First, your unfinished novel.
Yeah. Man, you're looking way back.
Well, I stumbled upon your New Year's resolutions from last year. And you said you wanted to have it done by 2006. So what's the story with Women and Children First?
Women and Children First is still a proposed title for as soon as I finished up some paranormal work. I still want to, I've had a fiction book out before, and I'd like to do it again.
Okay.
And so that I'm still working. I want it to be environmental in nature. I want to write a very good literary science fiction novel dealing with environmental collapse.
Oh wow!
And I'm thinking about doing it and working in an alien invasion motif into that. But I've written bits and pieces here and there. And I post some fiction snippets onto my website on the Dead Letter Office section, actually. So you can find a few little bits that have that same general flavor. But Women and Children First, the title. I just came up with the title and really liked it. So I kind of recorded it for posterity there on my blog, so I'd remember it. But no publisher has it or anything like that. It's not anything that you should be too excited about right now. but suffice it to say, I haven't abandoned my fictional ambitions.
Yeah, well, I figured I'd ask you about that because I was like, oh, look at this, he's working on a novel too. So, all right, well, we've talked really at length here about just a ton of stuff. What's coming up on the horizon here? What can we expect to see from you in 2007?
It's strange because I never really know exactly where it's going to go. I kind of my trajectory is just kind of organic. I just see where it takes me, what idea strikes, and I really can't control what when a particular idea is going to strike or what's going to surface. And the internet is a very advantageous tool in that respect. So I'm going to continue writing about whatever interests me, and hopefully I will meet with some success with that, in whatever. I know I have a few trips in line this year, it looks like. So looks like I'll be taking a few trips, which will be fun. I love traveling. And Other than that, who knows? I feel like I'm jinxing myself. But whatever I do, it'll probably be pretty weird, and it'll probably be one of those things that only a small percentage of people online appreciate.
Oh, don't say that.
Well, that's a small percentage online is a lot of people.
That's true,
and that's pretty. That has a very gratifying effect on me. So, I'm just going to continue doing what I've been doing for the last few years. Hopefully, ramp it up a few notches, and I should probably think more in terms of commercial viability as opposed to just simple intellectual satisfaction. But then again, there's no reason why those two can't. Why those two are mutually exclusive.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. I'm really excited about the way you tackle the esoteric phenomenon, and from your work on the Mars book and this new stuff with the cryptoterrestrial. You really you bring a big picture perspective, and you're not afraid to take a fresh look at things, which is really nice. And more what we need of really in the esoteric realm, because there's a lot of cookie cutter researchers out there that you couldn't, they're a dime a dozen, and you stand out from the pack because you're willing to take a different look at things. So, and I can understand now what all the buzz was about Mac Tonnies this past year. You've lived up to your reputation,
all
sir.
Right. Well, if I start just issuing dogmatic repetitions of the same old thing, then you have my permission to completely delete this interview from your website.
Oh, man.
Because that means the cryptoterrestrials have gotten to me.
All right. We'll keep that in mind. Thank you very much for being on the program. It was great having you. It was great talking to you for so long, and I'll be following your work, and I have a feeling that you and I will probably be crossing paths quite a bit in the future.
All right. That's a good thing. I had a good time.
There you have it, folks. That does it for this week's edition of Binnall of America Audio. Big, super huge thanks to Mac Tonnies for coming on the show and giving us so much of his time for the marathon interview session. You can find out more information on Mac Tonnies at the following websites: www.posthumanblues.blogspot.com, and his formal website is mactonnies.com, mactonnies.com. Moving right along now, it's time for Binnall of America Audio listener feedback. This week's letter comes from Lauren in Rhode Island. Here's what Lauren has to say. I recently listened to your podcast with John Greenwald and found it inspiring. I'm a 19-year-old college student, and I've loved ufology for years, but I never realized there's anything to get involved in. I hear there is a lack of young people in the field, and so I'd like to try and fill that gap a little. I don't need any convincing not to be embarrassed about it. I've never been one to care what the majority thinks. Unfortunately, I don't really know how to get more involved. Since it is such an underground, taboo topic, it's not like I see flyers around my campus for anything to do with it. I was wondering if you knew of anything I could get involved in. I love your podcast. Thanks for airing them, and keep up the good work. Lauren in Rhode Island. Thank you very much for writing in, Lauren. I appreciate the feedback, and I am just humbled that you found the BOA audio interview with John Greenwald inspiring. Hopefully we can inspire more young people to want to get involved in ufology and the esoteric in general. It doesn't have to be just UFO studies. Specifically regarding your inquiry, first and foremost, obviously, is the MUFON organization. They have these state meetings all over the place. I presume they have one in Rhode Island. I know they have one here in Massachusetts. You could always look into MUFON and see if that was something you were interested in, or at least use that as a springboard for networking with other people in the area to study the UFO phenomenon. So that's a start. Beyond that, as far as UFOs and young people UFO groups, there's nothing really particularly like that. But if you listened to the James Carrion interview here at BOA Audio, you heard him talk about MUFON working with a college to get a college MUFON organization up and running. So there is the chance that if one gets up and running, then you could start your own MUFON at your college. So I don't know, contact MUFON and talk to them about that sort of thing. Maybe you can get the ball rolling on that. Also, BOA columnist Tina Senna has a blog, ufology.blogspot.com, and I think that she's going to be focusing a lot on young people in ufology in the future there. So stay tuned to that blog. There's some roads for you to check out, Lauren. Let me know how those turn out. And obviously, we're always interested in hearing from young people interested in the esoteric. The more young people that get involved, the better. We are the next generation. So thank you so much for writing in, Lauren, and thank you for listening to the program. If you would like to be a part of Binnall of America Audio listener feedback, here's how you go about doing it. You go to binnallofamerica.com. You click Contact in the top right-hand corner of the screen. That will give you the information on how to get in touch with me. Or you write to boaaudio@hotmail.com. Either one of those methods puts your correspondence on the road to BOA Audio listener feedback. Next up, we thank the fine folks at binnallofamerica.com for your help and support with the audio series and the website. Leslie, Chiron, Arlie, Joe V, Ralph Molesworth, and Tina Senna. As I said last week, folks, it's so important I'm going to say it again. If you're only listening to Binnall of America Audio and you're just downloading the interviews and you're not reading the columns at the website, you are only getting half the story. You're really missing out on just a wealth of great esoteric material. Binnallofamerica.com. Make it a part of your everyday search for esoteric news and opinion. Also, I should point out additionally here this week that we are changing the style of the pages for the audio. When you go to get the audio, you may have noticed that the font's a little bit different. It's a little smaller. We added a funky Google ad. I apologize for that, but, I gotta do what I gotta do here. If you like the smaller font, let me know. If you missed the big font, I don't know, let me know. We'll work on that. But I figured I should mention it because, some people like being kept up to date on that sort of thing. Segueing from that note, if you are a longtime Binnall of America Audio listener or an appreciative newcomer, you've enjoyed the audio series. This week's episode was number 53 of the BOA Audio franchise as far as seasons 1 and 2 go. 53 episodes. I'm stunned by that number myself. If you're a long-time listener, you've listened to many of those 53. If you're a newcomer, you've only checked out 3 of the 53. And you want to help support the audio series, there's a simple way to do it. You go to binnallofamerica.com, you click the PayPal button, and you make a donation. All the costs for this audio series come out of my pocket with help from Binnall of America Audio listeners. If you can help, please do. Click the PayPal button and make a donation. It would be greatly appreciated. Next week, critically acclaimed alternative science writer Marie Jones comes to the program to discuss her book, Science. You may have heard of this one. It's spelled with a P, P-S-I-E-N-C-E. We're going to be talking about that tenuous and oftentimes antagonistic relationship between esoteric studies and the cutting edge of mainstream science, what some like to call new science. We're going to talk all about that strange relationship between those two different areas of research, how they're almost on the peripheral of each other. They're very close to each other, but at the same time they really can't seem to get it together, the esoteric and the new science. We're going to discuss some sociological aspects of esoteric research, funding, fear of ridicule. How does the niche science of esoterica get over that? We're going to talk about the latest in new science, from multiple universe theories to multiple dimension research, zero-point field, all kinds of areas that we have never discussed here on Binnall of America Audio before, but we're going to do it next week on the program with Marie Jones, the author of Science. And on that note, we'll call it a week. Thank you very much for listening, folks. Until you hear from me next week, this is Tim Binnall, signing off.